Beijing Olympics are a soggy, wet mess. An ESPN commentator says genocide in China is no big deal, and giant pandas could soon be everywhere. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by PC Doctor Toolbox. Protect your PC from software crashes, hardware failures, and the kind of glitches that make your life miserable. Speaking of life being miserable, the foreign athletes at the Beijing Winter Olympics. Olympic athletes have been complaining about no internet, bad food, and unsanitary rooms. And this week, a Finnish skier shared videos of water gushing into her and her team's living quarters. She'd been posting all week about water leaking into the room. Now, after athletes and journalists complain about the food at the Olympics, my favorite state-run media, the Global Times, responded with a story about how great the food was. So I expect to see a Global Times article about how dry and unflooded all the rooms are any day now. But can we really blame China too much? After all, they've given the world so many things, including, apparently, skiing. Skiing is generally believed to have originated in Northern Europe, but the Chinese Communist Party says skiing was actually invented in China 10,000 years ago. Yes, skiing has been a part of China since ancient times. The party has been making this claim since at least 2006. What evidence do they have? This cave painting. It's so obvious, isn't it? Okay, if maybe it isn't, it's these human figures here, totally hunting all the animals on skis. Those could be skis. And here's the kicker. The cave painting is in Xinjiang. You know, where the Chinese Communist Party is waging a bloody genocide on Uyghur Muslims? Well, that region was definitely not part of China 10,000 years ago. Today, ethnic Kazakhs, Mongolians, and other minorities still ski in the region, the ones that haven't been taken away to re-education camps. But weirdly, instead of acknowledging the history of that region, the Communist Party is also using the cave painting as propaganda to say Xinjiang has always been a part of China since ancient times. And speaking of Xinjiang, ESPN is helping the Chinese regime downplay all the genocide there. A sports writer and sports journalism professor for Northwestern University was asked by an ESPN anchor how we reconcile the Olympics and genocide in China. He compared it to Republican voting laws and sports injuries.
With genocide and human rights violations in the Tibet region and against Uyghurs in China, the International Olympic Committee chose Beijing while stating it is committed to human rights. J.A. Dane, as a fan and then as a reporter, how do you reconcile enjoying this competition while also considering everything I just said?
I think it's standard in sports right now. You have to have a cognitive dissonance. You need to compartmentalize. We've never had a more enjoyable NFL playoffs in this country, and we've never had more people watching the playoffs, and yet it goes on amid the ongoing allegations against Dan Snyder, owner of the Washington football team, and the continuous concussion concerns. And now the concerns about diversity and the allegations and the questions about competitive integrity even, all of that. And yet we're still enjoying the games.
Don't worry, it gets worse.
And who are we to criticize China's human rights records when we have ongoing attacks by the agents of the state against unarmed citizens, and we've got assaults on the voting rights of our people of color in various states in this country? So sports, I think it is possible, and it's necessary more than ever to just shut everything out if you are to enjoy the actual games themselves.
You know, he's got some good points. Guys are getting concussions in the NFL, so we should just shut up about the genocide in Xinjiang and enjoy the Olympics. To the anchor's credit, he tries to ask the professor again about China since there is, a genocide going on there. Here's his response.
Where can you choose that's free? And look at some of the other recent hosts of the games, including Russia and some other recent plays. It's very hard to find a country that isn't problematic when it comes to human rights, including here.
Okay, there's a difference between problematic and genocide. We are talking about the Chinese Communist Party killing people for their organs. But hey, since no one's perfect, let's just enjoy the Genocide Games. The International Olympic Committee is also doing its part in keeping quiet on human rights atrocities in China. There were a lot of concerns that Olympic uniforms would be made with forced labor in China. Well, the IOC did a thorough investigation, and guess what they concluded? They did not find any forced, bonded, indentured, or child labor. However, according to rights groups Human Rights Watch and the Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Uyghur region, the IOC study lacked a few minor details, such as details about the factories and production sites visited, the audit methodology and findings, or the steps taken to ensure that workers were not subject to reprisals for speaking to auditors or reporting violations. Now, while that sounds bad, keep in mind, tens of thousands of Americans die in car accidents every year. So you should probably just shut up and enjoy the Olympics. Chinese censors have been busy maintaining a proper image of the Olympics inside China. Meanwhile, outside China, Chinese operatives have also been busy. On American social media platforms like Twitter, pro-China accounts flooded hashtags critical of the Beijing Winter Olympics. What is hashtag flooding? It means putting a specific hashtag on a ton of posts that don't have anything to do with the original topic. It aims to dilute the effectiveness of a popular hashtag so that other Twitter users searching the term see swarms of unrelated content mixed in with announcements for coming protests or calls for other organized action. For a while last year, they hashtag flooded hashtag Genocide Games. So users saw a bunch of unrelated posts instead of posts critical of the Beijing Olympics. In some cases, hashtag flooding also triggers Twitter's anti-spam system, and then all related content gets taken down. The good news is that over the past year, Twitter has been deleting accounts linked to China's influence campaign. Like 170,000 accounts. But if you happen to see a profile like this, it's a good bet that's not a real person. Coming up after the break, the US and China go to war over pandas. Welcome back. Earlier this month, China and Russia released a joint statement. It says friendship between the two states has no limits. There are no forbidden areas of cooperation. No forbidden areas, huh? Sounds like they should call it the Brokeback Joint Statement. But this came out amidst fears Russia will invade Ukraine, and that China will use that as a cover to invade Taiwan. This week, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby spoke about the threat.
Their February 4th joint statement certainly provided further evidence that China has decided that they're going to stand alongside Russia with respect to what's going on in Europe, and we would say that their tacit support, if you will, for Russia is deeply alarming, and frankly, even more destabilizing to the security situation in Europe.
And a China-Russia alliance could be very dangerous for the United States. Not that the U.S. isn't capable of shooting itself in the foot. Part of the reason the early days of the pandemic were so difficult was because China dominated the medical supply chain. China hoarded medical supplies and blockaded any shipments to the U.S. China was able to do that because over the years, medical manufacturing slowly left the U.S. in favor of cheaper made-in-China alternatives. When the pandemic hit, the U.S. had nothing. Of course, after that whole disaster, surely the U.S. has learned its lesson, right? Nope. Chinese-made COVID tests were given to over 100,000 Super Bowl fans. The tests were made by iHealth Labs, a California-based subsidiary of a Chinese medical device maker, and on health. The Super Bowl required fans to show proof of vaccination and a negative COVID test. So, iHealth handed out 120,000 test kits to visitors at a pre-Super Bowl event at the LA Convention Center. But it's not just the Super Bowl. The Biden administration has been trying to get free COVID testing kits to millions of American households. Guess who's making a lot of them? Yeah, a third of all of these test kits are from iHealth. Since December 2021, the company has won contracts worth more than $2.1 billion with the U.S. federal government and some state governments. And after a major advertising campaign at the Super Bowl itself, I'm sure iHealth will only be getting more business. Meanwhile, the FDA has issued a warning about China-developed drugs. Apparently, some big Western drug makers are planning on making billions by selling Chinese medicine in the U.S. Because of course they are. But this new warning might actually put the brakes on it. FDA officials say they are concerned about the quality of the studies evaluating China-developed drugs. The officials are also concerned the drugs haven't been tested in U.S. patients. But the worst part about this is that Western drug companies want to use cheaper Chinese versions of drugs. And like every time this has happened before with other products, what that means is it would put American companies out of business. And then we become entirely dependent for our medical needs on a regime that kills political dissidents for their organs. This is, in a word, stupid. The U.S. is reopening an embassy in the Solomon Islands to counter rising Chinese influence. The Solomon Islands' increasing dependence on China is what sparked violent protests there in December. China sees immense military and strategic value in alliances with Pacific Island nations, filling a power vacuum left by declining U.S. influence. For more, check out the China Unscripted podcast episode, China is Trying to Kick the U.S. Out of Asia. At least this is a sign the U.S. is not giving up so easily. More bad news for troubled Chinese real estate giant Evergrande. A Chinese court has frozen $157 million of assets over missed construction payments. Evergrande is the world's most indebted property company. It has over $300 billion in liabilities. Yeah, billion. And it seems like it's the foreign investors who are going to be the biggest losers. If only foreign investors would learn that that's what always happens to foreign investors in China. China's gonna crash on the moon. There was a big story recently about how debris from SpaceX is going to crash into the moon. Well, it turns out the astronomer who said that got his facts wrong, and it's actually a chunk of a Chinese rocket that's going to crash into the moon. Don't worry, this Chinese rocket debris isn't a big deal. It's not like it's going to blow up the moon or something. Probably. But there's a greater evil to worry about. Pandas. Get this. If you don't know, China owns all pandas in the world. They essentially rent them out to zoos around the world for up to $1 million a year on a 10-year contract. Any babies they have still belong to China. But that may change. There's a new resolution proposed by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace. It says that any giant panda born in the United States should belong to the United States, and the United States should seek the coordination of its allies to establish collaborative giant panda breeding programs. He who controls the pandas controls the universe. Of course, resolutions are not laws. So even if it passes, it just means Congress thinks we should do this, not that we're going to do it. Now, I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, this will drive the Chinese regime crazy, which I like. I really like. And the state-run People's Daily is already foaming at the mouth about this. I really, really like. However, this would also mean America will have its own pandas, which I don't like. Unless the U.S. gets so successful at breeding giant pandas, and then they escape into the wild, become an invasive species, and then people need to start hunting them from helicopters just like we do now with wild hogs. I could see myself eating a panda steak. And this episode is sponsored by PC Doctor Toolbox. Computer and software crashes, hardware failures, and general computer slowdowns are way too common. And they can happen at the worst times, like when you're giving a business meeting or giving a presentation about pandas. It could happen anytime. And that's why if you're using a PC, you should also be using PC Doctor Toolbox. Stop crashes and other system problems before they happen. And we have a 50% off discount just for China Uncensored viewers. Use the link and coupon code below to take advantage of this special offer. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.